think there's actually a chance where we could carry out two baskets of action that could potentially lead Vladimir Putin to realize that he needs to have a cessation of hostility.
So, General Petraeus, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you with us. So, as we speak, we're looking at reports, not confirmed detail, but reports of a peace agreement having been drafted out between the American envoy and the representative of the Kremlin. Now, we don't know what is the fine detail or the substance of that deal, but it is suggested we could be looking at something which offers concessions, certainly more to Russia than to Ukraine, and which has caused concern in Ukraine and among Ukraine's friends. Now, your concern, David, is that the weakness, the actual weakness of Russia in this war, militarily and economically, has not truly been appreciated. Just tell me more about that line of thought.
Well, I actually think there's an opportunity right now, both because of much greater European speed and actions and diplomacy and greater spending on defense, increasingly substantial support for Ukraine. It now has not only exceeded the U.S. in support when you total up all categories, but now has even done more in the defense realm. And there's a unique opportunity by Europe to collateralize the $200 billion equivalent of Russian reserves in European banks in Euroclear bonds to give essentially as cash to Ukraine, which would be a real game changer for them. And then also the fragility of the Russian economy and the fact that Russia will run out of money in its national welfare fund, which has been diverted to enable the continued production and enhanced production of the military industrial complex of Russia. And so you put that together, and the European Union just did its 19th round of sanctions. The US is now implementing sanctions on Lukoil, Rosneft, and dozens of other companies. I think there's actually a chance where we could carry out two baskets of action that could potentially lead Vladimir Putin to realize that he needs to have a cessation of hostilities because of the pain inflicted not just on the battlefield, where he seems to be impervious to the fact that nearly 1.2 million Russian soldiers have been killed and wounded. That doesn't seem to concern him. But if you run out of money and you can't go to the IMF or the World Bank for a loan, and you're getting reduced sales of oil and gas, this should be another focus, and is a focus indeed. In fact, the Indian refineries and also Chinese refineries are already scaling back what they're buying from Russia. And if you help Ukraine on the battlefield, and the money will be the biggest help because they could double the number of drones they're producing from some 3.5 million per year using 9,000 a day to nearly 7 million. And then we help them in the areas where they don't have capacity to make it for themselves. And in particular, this is Patriot systems, Patriot interceptors, to improve their ability to counter the Russian missile strikes every night and the major drone strikes that are being carried out. So help them militarily, stop the Russians on the front lines, protect the airspace better, and then go after Russia economically and financially so that you crush the Russian war economy. You deprive it of its means by going after those who are enabling it by buying oil and gas, and those, largely China, who are providing all of the components, chips, magnets, motors, all the rest of that they need from China to enable their military industrial complex. If you do all of this simultaneously, I actually think you could have a Russian cessation of hostilities at both countries. And then if you add a third component, which would be ironclad threats, that if Russia resumes aggression, that you will take further actions to sanction them financially and economically. And you'll also have an ironclad promise to help Ukraine even more than we have, that you might even make this cessation durable in a way that it otherwise would not be. So again, this is a unique opportunity. This is notwithstanding the very, very tough times for both sides on the front lines, which are the most dangerous area in any front line in any war because of the ubiquitous aerial surveillance. Uh, but and how tough that is, and there's much less manpower on the Ukrainian side, to put it mildly, 5-1 outnumbered, and all kinds of issues with those that have been in combat for a very long period of time.
Yes.
All that notwithstanding, I think there actually is a chance right now to do something that hasn't been possible before because of how Ukraine has scaled up its production of unmanned systems of all types, by the way, at sea as well, where they've sunk 35% of the Russian Black Sea fleet and forced it basically to tie up in a port as far from Ukraine as they can get. And done all that, by the way, without any ships on their side, but rather with aerial drones that find the Russian ships and maritime drones that sink them. So again, I think there is that chance. And actually, if you want to negotiate successfully with Russia and get terms that could be acceptable to Ukraine, noting that there is a constitutional prohibition for a Ukrainian president to unilaterally decide to change the borders of Ukraine. You have to take that to the people in a vote. You put all that together, and again, I think you're in a much stronger negotiating position if you do what I've advocated as well.
Okay, well, that is a powerful set of arguments. Let me just unroll some of those points, because individually they are really quite compelling. I mean, you argue that it is possible to think about crushing the Russian economy, and you point out that as costly as this war has been for Ukraine, it's also been terribly costly for Russia. 1 million Russian casualties on the battlefield, half of those killed or taken permanently out of commission.
That's important to note. That again, they're either dead or they couldn't be returned to the front lines. They were so seriously wounded.
Yeah. Well, indeed, General, and now we are at a point, or maybe at any point, where to make concessions to Russia would be simply the wrong way to go. It would be possible, you argue, to bring Russia to the negotiating table, to force Russia to the negotiating table and not drag Ukraine into negotiations on terms it would not wish to see.
I think that's correct. Now, again, everything is speculation about what's in whatever agreement is out there, the 28 points, what they consist of, all that. I just don't feel knowledgeable enough to even have any comment on that, although clearly there are some who have either gotten leaks or have gotten some kind of information that causes them to have concerns about it. And certainly some of the previous proposals, I share some of the concerns about those, although I think it was also right for President Trump to try to bring about a cessation of hostilities to stop this horrible war, as he describes it, to stop the killing. The question is, how do you go about that? We tried the red carpet approach. I think that was appropriate to try. And Russia, Vladimir Putin, responded with the greatest number of missiles and drones on a number of successive nights after he got back to Russia. So,
but General, there is still, is there not, it's now pretty apparent after recent talks and meetings that the administration in the White House, President Trump's administration, does again seem set on making concessions to Russia that Ukraine would see as capitulation. And it's easy to see why why President Zelensky and those around him would see it that way.
Well, again, I don't know the details of the agreement. Again, from some of the reports, there's speculation about which I would be concerned if some of the details are there. But noting again, it's just premature to get into any kind of.
Well, in general principle, if I may, General, what would you say to the idea that it would simply be unjustified and wrong to give concessions at this point of any kind, even though we don't know the detail of this particular latest plan? It would be wrong to give concessions to Russia now that Russia could not take by force.
Again, as a general principle, I think that is correct. But again, you need to actually know what is it that they're talking about.
No, I'm addressing the principle. I'm addressing the principle there.
In return. Now, what we do know is that Russia has never wavered from what can be described as maximalist objectives.
Indeed.
They want to replace President Zelensky with a pro-Russian figure. They want to demilitarize Ukraine, and they want to be given land in the southeastern part of the country that they have not even approached. This includes the so-called fortified cities in the Donbass, portions of the provinces they haven't yet been able to capture and are very, very heavily defended and would be very problematic. I mean, it's taken Russia a year and a half or 2 years, depending on where you start the clock, just to encircle Pokrovsk, and just endless, countless, extraordinary casualties. In fact, the Ukrainians, I was just there for my 7th visit since the full-on invasion a couple of months ago, and the Ukrainians told me they've actually captured Russian soldiers who have been in the Russian army, not just their Russian unit, but the Russian army less than 2 weeks. This is malpractice. This is hard to believe, but what it indicates is they're signing somebody up, shoving them into a uniform, issuing a rifle and a Kevlar helmet, and racing to the unit. And then on arrival, the soldiers told, run across the street with these other 2 guys who you don't know and with whom you haven't developed cohesion or friendship, and see how far you can get.
Yes.
Again, that is sort of the state of the art. They have tried occasionally to use combined arms the way we used to know it, of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and combat engineers and air defense and artillery and mortars and so forth, electronic warfare. Now what it is a couple of soldiers or a few soldiers with Russian drones overwatching them, right over the top of them, sometimes on electric motorbikes or something, so there's no noise associated with it, essentially just getting to the next wood line or to the next house across the street. That's the pace of the offensive. And in return for that, sacrificing vast numbers of Russian soldiers.
Yes. I mean, when we look at what we hear from President Trump time and again, he says his main concern is to stop the killing, and he very obviously has his heart set on a Nobel Peace Prize. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd love to see the killing stopped as well. I think I applaud that impulse, that desire, that objective. The question is, how do you stop it? Yeah. And how durable will the agreement be that you reached to stop it? Here, I think that what we've seen in the past is quite a gulf between, again, what Russia has said are its goals. Again, the 3 objectives I mentioned are ones that no Russian president or Russian people could accept, I don't believe. And of course, there would be grave questions about the durability of any agreement which forces Ukraine to demilitarize or dramatically reduce its capabilities, which would seem to welcome further aggression after Russia's gotten its breath back and retrained and re-equipped and the forces that they have available.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about terms that no Ukrainian leader or the Ukrainian people could accept.
Again, that's certainly the case with the maximalist objectives that President Putin, Medvedev, and others have stated repeatedly.
Okay, now, so if let us say the president is motivated by a desire to stop the killing, I mean, there are some commentators, experts, who say the president is also motivated by the desire to do business with Russia, to restore trading relations and other business relations with Russia, and that's very much on his mind. But whatever his motivation turns out to be, are you of the view that the way to bring about peace is to, well, as you say, force Putin to the negotiating table and then take away the need and the possibility of further aggression, so it is no longer in Russia's interest?
Well, I think what you do is take away the possibility of further successful aggression to the extent that you possibly can. And that's really the key here, which would be the opposite of, obviously, what Russia would like to do, which is to demilitarize Ukraine. And then also, as I said, have that third group of actions where you have ironclad promises to take action against Russia and in support of Ukraine if Russian aggression resumes. I mean, the bottom line is now certainly with the clarity of hindsight, that we did not do enough in the wake of the 2014 seizure of Crimea
Yes.
and the Russian support for operations in the Donbass.
Could Ukraine's friends in Europe and elsewhere in NATO, could they compensate for a withdrawal of American support, which must be a real possibility?
I don't know how real that is, honestly. I think the support in Congress, especially for Ukraine, as evidenced by the fact that reportedly there are 90 out of 100 senators that support a sanctions package on Russia that is
Yeah.
very substantial and also includes secondary sanctions on countries that enable
Yes.
Russia, either by buying gas and oil or by
Yeah.
providing components.
Although that legislation, General, gives power to the president to do those things. It is at his discretion. We heard the senator who strongly supported these measures, Lindsey Graham, said it gives the president discretion to act. It doesn't mean that he has to. And so far, he has not been keen to
No,
take more limited measures.
I mean, sanctioning Lukoil and Rosneft is very
Yes.
considerable. In fact, one of them is having to sell all of its operations outside of Russia. So
Yeah.
it's very significant. And then actually
Yeah.
much overlooked is the list of, I think it's 24 or so companies in which we cannot invest. So this is the entities list, similar to the entities list built by the Biden administration of Chinese companies that are typically involved in defense or dual use technologies.
Yeah.
Very similar to that. And that number is going to continue to grow, I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah.
you do see for the first time in this administration that kind of really quite significant sanctions being imposed. And that complements very much the EU's 19th round of sanctions, what was just recently approved in the last few weeks. Now, if they can figure out how, again, to collateralize the frozen Russian reserves, turn that into Euroclear bonds, which is essentially money to Ukraine that's only has to be repaid when Russia pays reparations to Ukraine, which probably means never, that would be very, very significant.
Yes. Well, and there are those who argue, as you know, that the measures that have been taken, including against those two Russian oil companies, they can be circumvented in different ways, and they want stronger measures too. But I mean, your point is clearly noted. Meanwhile, General, we see Elbridge Colby, who's a senior official in the Department of War, as we must now call it, talking about NATO and saying he wants to see at some point in the future European command of NATO handed over to Germany. It's always been held, as you know very well, by an American senior commander, which looks to some, concerns some, as another sign of coming American disengagement. Do you share that concern?
I do. First of all, I know Bridge. I think he's a very bright guy. He's the grandfather of a very prominent, one of the directors of the CIA, well before my time, highly respected, whose portrait hangs in the outer room of the director's dining room. And I have very strongly supported some of his proposals, most significantly about the importance of the Indo-Pacific, but not as far as he has gone on NATO. So we have agreed to disagree on this. In fact, my argument is that if you don't support Ukraine, the US that is, then you are undermining deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. Deterrence is a function of a potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities on the one hand and your willingness to use them on another. If you don't support a country that has been brutally invaded by its neighbor, Russia in this case, a country that shares our principles, values, beliefs around elections, democratic elections, around free market capitalism, the rights of individuals, freedom of speech, and so forth. And none of these are perfect in Ukraine, to be sure, and they're involved in a terrible corruption issue right now. Nonetheless, if you don't help that country, why would they believe that you would help another country somewhere else? You can say the same about some of our activities in the Middle East. I felt, for example, that the red line on chemical weapons use that turned out not to be a red line undermined deterrence. In fact, I was in the office of Singaporean Prime Minister Lee at that time. And he said, you know, General, that has repercussions out here in the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and so forth. So again, we come at this from a different perspective. My understanding is that there's some softening of that particular inclination. And once again, let me tell you that Congress would be a very significant check on that. And I
Okay.
think the executive branch does know that. I think Secretary of War knows that as well. There's been, in fact, a fair amount of comment about Undersecretary Colby by senior Republican senators on the Armed Services Committee and so forth. And I think that there's keen awareness of that in the Pentagon.
All right, good. So before we part, General, just a final thought at this stage of negotiations between Russia, between the United States, and of course Ukraine looking in, as well as European allies. While these talks go on, it is, isn't it, a worrying time for Ukraine, and there is a real possibility that yet again Putin and the Kremlin are simply stalling, playing for time.
Oh, I think that's absolutely the case. And I think that, again, President Trump and the US administration have come to recognize that. That's the only way you can explain the sanctions that the president has imposed. It's the only way to explain the strong, strong support. Again, 90 out of 100 senators don't agree on anything these days in the very highly partisan Washington, D.C., and yet they do agree on this. I think these are factors that augur for a realistic approach to this. I felt the previous administration, I think it was that what the Secretary of State, I think, was fond of saying nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. I think that's probably still a very good adage to follow. And I'm confident, again, that there will be adequate involvement of Ukraine in this. At the end of the day, it has to take place. But of course, right now, all we're doing is speculating. And that's always very fraught, I think, to use a wonderful British term.
All right, General Petraeus, good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So, Clara, welcome to the program. Thank you for taking time to talk. I'm going to start by asking you to just explain the work that you do, the use of AI in dealing with people with mental health challenges.
So our goal, our big picture goal between my co-founder, Mitzi Perdue, myself, and General Petraeus was to help Ukraine fill the huge unmet need for mental health assistance. Ukraine has less than one provider per 100,000 people, with a population that's estimated about half of needs mental health support. We quickly realized that we would not be able to find enough people to fill this gap, and so we started looking at ways to bring together psychologists and AI to build something clinically evidenced and based in part off of what therapists thought would work well. So we've been building an AI model to give mental health support to help augment the vast need for mental health assistance. It also has a triage system where we're able to refer out care to individuals we flag as needing a higher level of care. But essentially, the goal is to have a personalized, anonymous pocket companion that you can turn to in tough moments in Ukraine, which there are a lot of. Occasionally the air sirens, go off in the middle of the night, and people sometimes need somewhere else to turn to. And so our goal is to fill that need and help support the work that therapists there are doing.
Well, it's not hard to imagine the scale of this problem. The troops returning from the battlefield, in many cases inevitably with post-traumatic stress disorder, and civilians living under this kind of stress of constant fear of harm, of bombardment from the Russian enemy. The pressure must be truly, truly colossal.
Massive pressure. Both from the outward stuff and then also the silent things that build. One area we've been particularly concerned about has been traumatic brain injury for troops. You're getting hit by glide bombs, by drones day in, day out. Those micro traumas do manifest. One thing that we are hoping to build in and get it to a very high accuracy is early detection of traumatic brain injuries in users interacting with the AI so that we can flag them and see what additional steps we can take. But these are guys who have been out there for 3 years on the front, no major breaks in the fighting or conflict where they're able to really go decompress. And so the moments they do have off, it's essential to be trying to give them care so that we support them while they're out there. And then also we have a way to support them when we have some version of a ceasefire and we have to focus on rehabilitation and reintegration to decompress from the last very tough 3 years.
It is a feature, isn't it, of this kind of harm in the case of troops, for example, on the battlefield in that constant peril, that the harm only becomes apparent later.
Yes, very often, because these guys, to be able to perform at their best, they are just swallowing a lot of this. They're trying to not think about it. This particular style of warfare has additional effects that I think we'll see more of later. As you probably are aware, a lot of guys are wearing these first-person view drones where they wear goggles and are able to see the targets they're hitting, see the eyes of people they kill, very up close and personal. And all these add up to a desensitization of what they are doing in terms of when a drone does explode, it is killing a human, a person. And you see a lot more videos getting shared of that. And I think people are slowly desensitizing to it, but many effects are likely to come from that we are not aware of yet.
So, I mean, do tell me, Clara, then, what role does AI play in caring for, in treating and helping the people we're talking about?
AI helps in several ways. The first being it is this silent, always on, always ready companion that if you're in a pinch in the middle of the night, you're having a panic attack in a shelter in Ukraine and hearing air raid sirens, you do have some resource to turn to where you can get steps that are vetted by professionals, that are anonymous and that are giving you accurate results. You're not just scrolling on the internet hoping something works. You're getting something that is guided by doctors. On the second hand, it also helps by capturing and logging some of the data that we see across Ukraine. And that can help us find patterns. So, for example, in certain areas, you may see people flag trauma or rape or certain crimes or certain, different indicators that we look at. Our hope is that once we have most of Ukraine mapped and we're really getting lots of data in, we'll be able to help direct resources and additional support from Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Defense, different groups, and say, hey, this is what we're flagging in this area. This may need more support. And then thirdly, it helps us create a referral and triage pool. Ukraine inherited this old Soviet-style system of mental health care. There wasn't a lot of existing data before the conflict in terms of what doctors you could turn to, who was reputable. They've kind of been doing this on the fly and trying to build out safe frameworks while they've been in conflict. And so AI is a good triage system. You can give it your city where you are, and we can find free resources for care and interconnect people that we feel are high risk.
Right. So the program, can people make contact with the program? It can also collect data on that person and guide them to where help is most useful, and also gather information that might be useful centrally to get a picture of how serious the situation is across Ukraine, as much of Ukraine as you're able to cover. What about direct contact between the AI program and the sufferer? What does that look like?
So right now the program is it's text-based. You can also do voice to text. Essentially, you log on to you find our website on your phone, computer. You can put in your anonymous user ID if you want to have a continuous session, or you can enter and get an anonymous guest session. For new users, you get an intake form that we've designed to be able to quickly flag people that we should take extra care with if they've had existing mental health struggles. And essentially, it launches a session. It's almost like a guided talk therapy, but it does have this very large existing pool of knowledge for trauma-informed care for war settings, which has been reinforced by our therapists there who have trained it on the local context and struggle. Right. And styles that work for Ukrainians, because
it's a laptop, it's a phone, it's a smartphone acting as a therapist.
Yes, in essence, a laptop trained by professionals with clinically guided evidence-based care strategies, so that what they're getting is not just something generic and spread to everyone, but personalized for you and on data that experts feel it should be trained on.
Right, and lastly, then, and you've seen the results. You've seen that it is and can be effective. Is this something you think it would be that can be applied, well, generally across states, across public health services, private health services around the world. Is that the ambition?
That is the goal. The goal is to pilot this, to measure the efficiency, and then spread it to other areas. Because we quickly realized that this mental health crisis is not just limited to conflict zones. You see it in the United States with veterans who are turning to models like ChatGPT for mental health care because they're not getting enough appointments that they need. And it's great that there is some tool now, but we need something that is guided by therapists, anonymizes your data, and does have that evidence-guided care built into it. Our hope is to release this to other conflict zones, to the United States, and also give our findings back that are particularly mental health focused to the foundational model companies so that they can improve their own safety guardrails. As you know, we see the massive spikes in users across the board. It's one of the most widely used technologies in history. And we feel that safety could improve. And so our goal is to give back to the overall AI community as well.
All right, Clara, good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.